What's up? This is Matt with Surf City TCG. Welcome back to the Surfies, part 3 of my series where we're covering the best commander cards of 2024, nominees in over 20 different categories. It was definitely a strong year for Magic, lots of good cards this year. If you didn't catch either part 1 or part 2 of this series, I'd recommend starting with those. I'll provide the link for you here. Just to recap, this is my personal evaluation of cards released in 2024. All these evaluations are based on my typical playstyle, which is mid to high powered, non-CEDH decks, usually power level 7 to 8-ish. I don't normally play with infinites because that's just how it is at my LGS, and I prefer to have more creative ways to win the game. But these are going to be strong, optimized decks, just no infinite win cons. So, with that all being said, let's dive into it. Right, we're starting off with the token makers category. So, the Surfie for best token maker of the year. And I was a little bit liberal with the definition of a token maker, as you can see with the first card on the list here, which is Abhorrent Oculus. This is an eye creature, not a beholder, just an eye. 3 mana for a 5/5. Talk about power creep with flying. Okay. But, as an additional cost to cast this spell, we have to exile 6 cards from our graveyard. So, unless we're cheating it in, it's a little bit harder to cast. You can't just drop this on turn 3 without jumping through a few extra hoops. But if you do manage to land it, not only do you get a 5/5 flying body, I mean, does an eye have a body, or is it just an eye? Or is the eye the body? I don't know. Anyway, but at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, you're going to manifest dread. Now, this is the new mechanic from Dustborn. Manifesting dread means you're going to look at the top 2 cards of your library. You're going to say, okay, I want to pick one of these to be a face down creature. That's a manifest. And the other one goes to your graveyard. So the manifested creature, if it's a creature, it can be anything, right? So you can manifest a land, an instant, a sorcery, whatever you want. Typically, you're not going to be able to flip those. If you've manifested a non-creature card, then you can't flip it unless you have some other way to do that. Like, for example, the Zimone commander from this set can flip stuff, right? If it's other things. But normally you just can't flip it if it's not a creature. But if it is a creature, you can flip it for its mana cost at instant speed. So, you know, you're probably, unless you're building around a face down mechanic, like with Simone, for example, you probably don't care about that. Really, this is just a 5/5 with flying that's going to make you a 2/2 on every player's untap or upkeep step, rather. And not only are you making a 2/2, but you're getting to filter through your deck. And, like, yeah, you don't get to draw these cards, but you're getting to put certain cards in your graveyard. So typically you're going to want to play this in a deck that cares about getting cards into the graveyard. For example, like this goes great in a Mirko deck or any deck that cares about filling the graveyard for any reason, because you get to look at the top 4 times a turn cycle, and you're looking at the top 8 cards every turn cycle. I guess it's only on opponent's turns, so it's the top 6 cards of your deck, putting 3 of them into your graveyard and putting 3 of them face down as 2/2s. So, I mean, this card is just unbeatable value. The trick really is getting it into play. So you have to be running a way to do that, or at the very least, several cantrips, stuff like Ponder Preordain, which, I mean, I run those in every blue deck anyway, but they're extra good in this deck. And cards like Thought Scour and Mental Note are exceptionally good with Abhorrent Oculus. And of course, as many fetch lands as you can cram into your deck are always going to be good, regardless of the number of colors you're playing. So this, these aren't technically tokens, but I did put it under the token maker category because these feel like tokens. They're just 2/2s. They usually don't do anything. Sometimes you'll get a little bit of benefit from them, and maybe you can scare someone or bluff an attack here and there. But in general, it's just like a 5/5 with flying that's going to fill your graveyard and make you a bunch of 2/2s, which is pretty dang good. So, very strong one there. Glaring Fleshraker, we talked about him in the Group Slug category, in fact, the category just prior to this. And boy, is he a powerhouse in that category. And, no exception in the token maker category. These 1/01 Eldrazi spawn tokens you make, I mentioned this in the last video, these are no joke. I mean, each one is like a lotus petal. It's not quite that good, right? It can't make colored mana, but these are very valuable. They can definitely ramp you. If you play this on turn 3, cast a couple, even one colorless spell the following turn, that's still ramping you ahead. If only for one turn, it's allowing you to play your 6 drop on turn 4, potentially, instead of turn 5 or turn 6. Like if you play this in a Zuladoc Void Gorger deck, you play it on turn 3, you play just a single mana rock, like an Arcane Signet or whatever. I guess, can you run Arcane Signet in Zuladoc? I don't think you can actually. So not Arcane Signet, um, but like whatever else, an Everflowing Chalice, a Thought Vessel, Liquid Metal Torch, any of those are good. And then you've got your mana rock, you've got the Eldrazi spawn you make, and that means the following turn you can cast Uladoc, and that's what you want to do. So Glaring for Fleshwaker is just super, super strong card. The pinging that it does gets out of control so fast. It's just this is such a powerful package all in one card. And the fact that we're seeing it as a nominee for best card of the year in two different categories, one right after another, is definitely a testament to the power level of this card. It's a very strong one. So if you see one of these land across the table from you, you should be worried. And I would be looking to remove this ASAP. This is a top tier target in terms of like stuff you should be prioritizing removing. Next on the list is Comball, Profiteering Mayor. You thought you hated the original Comball. Take a look at this fellow. I just ran into a Comball across from me today when I was playing my Volo Guide to Monsters deck, which I wasn't terribly pleased about, as you can imagine, because what Comball does is whenever one or more tokens enter the battlefield under your opponent's control, for each of them, create a tap token that's a copy of it. This ability triggers only once each turn. And whenever one or more tokens enter under your control, each opponent loses one and you gain one. Because they had to tack on this aristocrat drain to this already ultra powerful effect. It didn't need that second paragraph, but I digress. So the first paragraph, let's just come back to that real quick because it is a little confusing and I often hear people getting confused with it. You make as many tokens as they made, assuming all of those tokens were made via the same effect. So, for example, let's say your opponent has a There and Back Again, and they create a Smog token off it. You would get a copy of that Smog token. But if they then sacrificed their Smog in the same turn to create 14 treasure tokens, you wouldn't get any of those. On the other hand, if they created their Smog and then waited a turn and then sacrificed it, then you would get your Smog tapped. And then when they sacrificed theirs, assuming it was the first time Comball had been triggered that turn, you would get all 14 treasures since those are all made at the same time. So hopefully that makes sense. You only get the first thing that gives you a token on any given turn. But if that effect is creating multiple tokens at the same time, you do get all of those, assuming they're not separate triggers. So this is an extremely powerful commander. In fact, if you build around it, there's a lot of great things you can run, stuff that gives opponents tokens. There's obvious stuff like Generous Gift, but then there's a lot of other, fun and sneaky things you can do. However, just throwing this in any random deck that can support it, you will find that, 2024 more than any year prior, and I suspect this trend to continue, is about tokens. Tokens are such an integral part of Magic in the modern era that I think Comball stock has nowhere to go but up because this is such a powerful effect. Not necessarily. I mean, honestly, I think it is threatening enough that you have to deal with it, especially if it's not someone's commander and it's not just like they're going to replay it. But if this just sits there and is making them tokens every time someone makes a token, you may not think that that's going to happen that often, but I think you'll be surprised when you look at a game and tally up how many tokens are created. In fact, if someone wants to test that out and just like as an experiment and let me know in the comments, like, hey, I took a random game, like the next game I played, and I just tallied every single time someone made a token and how many, and let me know how many that is. But I would venture to guess that it's going to be like 40 plus, if not like 60 plus. Maybe I'm overestimating, but I feel like every time I've seen Comball, it just pops off. And I'm like, okay, well, this game must have been the exception, but then it's proven itself over and over and over and over. So, if you're not a believer, try it out. Just swap this into like let's say you're running regular Comball in some deck. Doesn't matter what deck it is, just try swapping it out. Or even if you don't want to do that, just pretend like your regular Comball is this Comball next time you have a Comball out. And just evaluate like what would it be doing right now. And obviously you can't trust that 100% because opponents might be making different plays if you had Comball Profiteering Mayor in play. But just for the sake of experiment, like test it out. Let me know how that goes. I think that you'll find that Comball Profiteering Mayor earns his spot in any deck list that can support it. This is a really, really good card. Speaking of really good cards, good kitty, Ocelot Pride. Have you heard of this card? It's a little bit infamous already, and it really is that good. One white mana for a 1/1 with first strike and lifelink. And you might be telling yourself or telling me, hey Matt, like first strike on a 1/1, like doesn't seem that relevant. But like to be honest, the first strike is pretty relevant because like the thing is he's got lifelink. He feels let me finish reading the card before I start talking about it. How about we don't get ahead of ourselves? Good? Good. Okay. 1/1. Cat. First strike and lifelink. He's got Ascend, meaning if you have 10 or more permanents at any point in the game, then you receive the city's blessing. And once you have the city's blessing, even if you dip below 10 permanents, it doesn't matter. You have it forever. So once you have the city's blessing, something different happens. But you at the beginning of your end step, no matter what, if you gain life that turn, you make a 1/1 white cat creature token. Then, so you get that no matter what. Then, if you have the city's blessing, you also get the second effect, which is for each token you control that entered the battlefield this turn, create a copy of it. So, at minimum, if you gain life and you have the city's blessing, you're going to make a 1/1 white cat creature token and then a copy of that. So, you'll get two 1/1 cats. So, that is the absolute floor for what this card is going to do if you've gained life that turn. So, that is really the trick. But so now we could talk about the evaluation of this card. They gave him lifelink, because why not give it a way to self-fuel its own ability? And then, just for the hell of it, let's give him first strike too. So now you can't even chump block it with a 1/1 and deal with this little pest forever. You have to block it with at least something with 2 toughness. It's just so good. It's so easy to get in for that 1 point of lifelink. And usually you're running this in a deck that has ways to gain life outside of it because, after the first 2, 3, 4 turns, it becomes pretty difficult to get through with just a 1/1, even though it might have first strike. Unless you give a death touch, in which case, oof, that's a bitch to deal with. An Ocelot Pride with a Basilisk Collar. A little bit of a flavor non-bow there, but like, hey, that's some power right there. But this card is just bonkers. I mean, like, it it's like an anointed procession or a Mondrak on a 1 mana card, and it makes its own tokens too, because why not? It just does everything, and it copies any tokens you made Doesn't have to be creatures. It's not like Osier Talk, which can only copy creature tokens. It's like Mondrak or Anointed Procession. It copies any tokens you made that entire turn. Those could be treasure tokens, food tokens, clue tokens, creature tokens, clones of things. Like, there's so many tokens running around. We just talked about this with Comball. Like, and you're going to copy all of them. If you have this and Comball, wow. I mean, like, you have to have made the Comball tokens on your turn, which is a little harder to pull off because opponents aren't typically going to be making creature tokens on your turn, or not that frequently. But if they do, you get a copy of whatever Comball made for you. If you cast something like a replication technique or Season of Weaving and make a copy of a creature, or you cast an Elminster Simulacrum, like Ocelot Pride is going to copy all of those tokens that you made. Assuming you have the City's Blessing, which like getting the City's Blessing is like nothing. It happens so easily. Like it's yeah, you in a game of Commander, especially if you're playing this in a token deck, which you probably are, it's like getting the city's blessing is nothing. The city is a whore. So yeah, assume you're gonna have the city's blessing. The city will love you. How could they not? Look at this cute kitty. And this is like not even the cute version, right? If we wanted to switch, we could see like, oh, so cute. But man, look at that price tag. Whew. You know, for $40, like this is steep. This is steep ask for a 1/1, but like man, it does a lot for a 1/1. I tell you what, like this is a really good card. So uh I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know here. Everyone agrees that this card is crazy good, but what I experienced playing it was that it was even better than I expected somehow. So really strong card. Good kitty. Simulacrum Synthesizer. This, hands down, is my favorite card of the year. When they revealed this, I like I it this is everything I always wanted in a card. I love it so much. I it's just I'm overwhelmed with emotion. I just love it. This card is so powerful. It's so fun. I love what it does. I I couldn't be happier with it. So let's talk about what it does. This is from the Big Score subset,
We're gonna score now.
and loved the Big Score subset, by the way. So many sweet cards from that. Yeah, one of my probably almost certainly my favorite set of the year, if that counts as its own set. Big Score from Outlaws at Thunder Junction. Such a fun set. So many cool cards. This definitely my favorite. But what does it do? It's a 3 mana artifact, not legendary, a little questionable, extremely questionable. But like, I guess it's not legendary. That's the point. It's just like, they're cranking these out and they have a bunch of them. Like it's like the Matrix or some shit, right? So anyway, 3 mana artifact. When it enters, you scry 2. Okay. Don't know why they had to tack that on, but sure. Thanks. Scry 2 is nice. It's, you know, close to drawing a card. Probably not quite as good. Scry 2 is probably not quite as good as Draw 1, but it's not that far. I'd say Scry 3 and Draw 1 pretty close to equivalent in terms of like quantifiable value that you might get over the course of a game. Obviously, that's very hard to compare, but I just did it, so deal with it. Whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater, so if you make a copy of this because it's not legendary, you have another artifact with mana value 3 entering. Hint, 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 hint. Anyway, whenever another artifact with mana value 3 or greater enters the battlefield under your control, create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with, quote, this creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. So if you have no other artifacts when this effect resolves, like your synthesizer was destroyed in response and that is your only artifact, then it's a 1/1. They call these constructs, by the way. Um, because Karn makes them. You know, Karn Planeswalker. And these tokens are, these are the same tokens that like Urza Saga makes, for example, or Urza Lord High Artificer. These tokens, they stack obviously quite well because the more you have, the more they pump each other. And if you start making copies of Simulacrum Synthesizer, for example, I run this as a key win con in my Saheeli Sun's Brilliance deck. And, you know, there have been turns where I'm like, okay, tap Saheeli, make a copy of the synthesizer, untap her, make another copy, untap her, make another copy. And then, you have more and more. First of all, you're scrying two all those times, which is like, okay, insult to injury for your opponents. But then it's like, how many card structs are you making with that I just went through? Yeah, it does get out of control real fast. And then just throw in Ocelot Pride to top things off, and boom, you're in business. You've got all of a sudden 120 power on board. And it's like, wait, what just happened? Obviously, you can't run Ocelot Pride in Sealy the Sun's Brilliance, but you get the point. Simulacrum Synthesizer, it's it's just my I'm in love. I love it so much. I just want to play this card and only this card. Is that wrong? I'm just gonna scrap all of my decks and build every deck around this card from here on out. I'm gonna change the name from Surf City TCG to Simulacrum Synthesizer TCG. Okay, I'm done. Oh, no, but look at it. Isn't it so glorious? All right, let's move on. Spring Heart Nantuko. 2 mana, 1/1, enchantment creature, insect, monk. Okay. It's got Bestow for 1 and a green also. So you could cast it for 1 and a green, or you could bestow it for 1 and a green. If you bestow it, it's an aura that says enchanted creature gets +1/+1. And as I mentioned in a previous card analysis, I forget which one, Detective's Phoenix, I think. Bestow, unlike an aura, if the target, if if what you were bestowing upon like is no longer there by the time the resolution happens, then this just lands as a creature. It doesn't fizzle like an aura would. So bestow is safer than auras, but you really want to land it here because what it does is on landfall, whenever a land enters, you can pay 1 and a green, and then if it's attached to a creature, you make a copy of that creature. So you put this on your Avenger of Zendikar and shenanigans, right? You put this on your Nyx Blue Agent. Yikes. Argon of Cruelty. Pyrogoyf. Oh my god. Put this on Pyrogoyf with some mana up. GG's. Uh, if, if this isn't attached to something, then you just make a 1/1 green insect. So it's like a Scoot Swarm that isn't online, like you didn't have the 6 mana yet, which is still good. Like honestly, if you just like landfall, make a 1/1 insect, like that is a fine consolation prize. Of course, you would prefer to have it bestowed on something and then you're making copies of it because that does craziness, right? You know, you bestow you bestow Springheart Nantuko on your Ocelot Pride, and then like make a couple copies of it, and then make a couple more at the end step, and like you tell two friends, and they tell two friends, and then before you know it, profit. Um, Springheart Nantuko is such a fun card. There, there are just like so many shenanigans that can happen with this. It's not like the sky's the limit. I mean, try to think of something that doesn't go insane with this. Of course, it's like you need all the mana to pay for it, right? To pay for all those copies, but there's tons of infinites with it because all you have to do is have a way to generate some mana when the token enters, and then like it can create an infinite loop. You can see how this might work. Like I don't even need to go through some examples, but here are some just for example. Springheart Nantuko, just a busted card. I'm shocked that it's this inexpensive right now. It's only a rare, and there's tons of MH3 open, so I get it. But this is going to be a card that will live on in infamy, not just in Commander, but in other formats as well. So definitely make sure you've got at least one of these in your collection. I would. All right, last but not least, Foreign Soul Trader. This cute little fellow is a zombie goblin wizard. He's a 3 mana 3/3 that has one simple but ultra powerful ability, which says pay 1 life, sacrifice another creature, create a treasure token. So no tap symbol means no summoning sickness. I mean, he has summoning sickness, you can't attack with him, but using that activated ability doesn't require it to have haste. You can do it right away. And yeah, this is just one of the top tier sack outlets of all time. It's up there with the best of the best, those being Ashnod's Altar, Phyrexian Altar, Altar of Dementia. To a slightly lesser extent, there's Spawning Pool, and there's tons of other ones. But this is forever going to be in up there with the likes of those best sec outlets ever. The black ones being the 1 mana guys like Carrion Feeder, Viscera Seer. But this effect is so powerful. What you're getting, and the 3/3 body too. Like what you're getting for 3 mana here, and on a non-legendary, it's just absolutely nuts. This is so pushed. This just pours so much gasoline on any sort of aristocrat strategy. It just creates it greases the wheels so much that like you can't help but go off when you've got one of these in play. And the 1 life is practically meaningless. When you're popping off this hard, when you have Warren Soul Trader in play, it's just like, you know, God help your opponents if they have if you have Mirkwood Bats in play alongside this, or like a Nadir's Nightblade or any sort of aristocrat effect. It's just like boom, game over. Like you can drop just that black reanimate that can like only, I think it's called Wake the Dead. I'll put it up on the screen, but like you drop one of these like instant speed reanimate things, like even though it's only temporary, you drop one of these mid to late game, and you have Warren Soul Trader in your graveyard, that's GG. It's just like boom, sack everything, do a billion damage. Like you bring back Warren Soul Trader, Mirkwood Bats, and like, just some token maker. Like, like if you have a Pawn of Ulamog or something thrown in with that, like, oh, it's just, I, they better hope they're at like 50 plus life or they're just literally dead, like instantly from bringing back, 3, 4 creatures. Even a victimized, like just on one target could get you where you need to be in terms of getting the W. Yeah, it makes sense that they called this card Born Soul Trader because it's going to get you a lot of W's. I tell you what, like this is, yeah, he's a contender for best card of the year. In fact, look at it, look at that. Hey, don't peek over there. We're not there yet. We still have like 1,000 videos before I get there. My goal is to get there by the end of 2025, so we'll see if that happens. Anyway, it's that time you've been waiting for. Time to announce the winner. The 2024 Surfie for Best Token Maker of the Year goes to. Ooh, this was a tough one. These are all so, so good, but we got to give it to Ocelot Pride. That 1 mana is really what it's what we're talking about here. And he creates his own tokens. He has lifelink, he has first strike. What more can you ask? It's a cute kitty. How could you how could you say no to those eyes? So cute. Well deserved. Honestly, any of these cards could have won. They're all so good. Maybe not a poor Oculus, but the rest of these, I think, are all contenders, even at poor Oculus. But I'd say it was between Ocelot Pride and Warren Soul Trader as the top choice. I'd love to give it to the synthesizer because I'm in love with this card. I don't know if I mentioned that. But Ocelot Pride is just so good. Look, it's the most expensive card. Did you know Magic is pay to win? You heard it here first. Let's move on to the next category. All right, look at this. Anthem Pump. I narrowed it down to 4 cards. Aren't you proud of me? Look, I have some restraint, right? Come on. All right, let's get into it. Anthem Pump. So I did separate +1 counters from this because I felt like it deserved its own category given the sheer quantity and quality of the +1 counters cards that we got this year. But that is for the next topic. So let's focus on Anthem and Pump cards. So these are cards that are persistent pump effects, but aren't giving +1 counters. So just like static +1/+1 or more effects. So let's start off with Banner of Kinship. This is the new one from Magic Foundations. So this is a 5 mana artifact. It's definitely got Coat of Arms vibes. And as it enters, you choose a tribe. So you're going to pick a creature type, and then it enters with a fellowship counter on it for each creature you control of that type. So as you cast it, you pick a type, you count up how many creatures you have of that type, and it gets that many counters. Simple, but very powerful. And then it gives +1/+1 for each of those counters to all of those creatures. So very straightforward but powerful Anthem effect. Um, Compare this to something like, I mean, the obvious comparison is Coat of Arms. Coat of Arms is a weird and crazy card. I don't recommend playing it. First of all, it's a huge headache. You have to like constantly be counting up the card. It affects everyone, right? This doesn't. Coat of Arms, you have to like constantly be counting up how many types. Okay, like, and with all these creatures with like 3 different types, like Foreign Soul Trader we just looked at, it's just such a pain. Coat of Arms is very powerful, don't get me wrong, but like it can also totally backfire on you because it can affect your opponents too. It does affect your opponents too. So this is much more straightforward. It only affects your stuff. It only affects one creature type. It doesn't just like give a blanket effect to all creatures depending on how many there are, like Coat of Arms. So this is much more comparable to something like Door of Destinies. It's a little bit, I think it's better. Like, to be honest. However, there are certainly going to be times when Door of Destinies would have been better. Example, if they Cyclic Rift in response to your Banner of Kinship, that's that's going to be a rough time for you because like now all of a sudden you have 0, it enters with 0. So even if you had a way to proliferate like Karn's Bastion or some other proliferate effect, like it doesn't have any counters, so it's going to do nothing unless you have a way to return this to your hand and recast it. So you do want to wait until it's sort of safe or it's like do or die time to cast this because once it's down, you better be winning or people are going to be turning on you pretty quickly. So this is a finisher for sure. This is you could just drop it early. Like it's actually not a terrible way to play it. It's just to like wait till you have a couple things out, drop it for 2 or 3 counters. If you make it small enough, it might be not enough of a threat for someone to remove. It also might not be worth it for you. It's really something you'll have to evaluate on a case by case basis. But yeah, it's a really good card, especially in certain colors. Like I wouldn't play this in an elf deck necessarily. Maybe, it depends. But green has such good Alpha Strike sort of effects, like Crater Hoof Behemoth, the obvious one, Pathbreaker Ibex, Finale of Devastation. The list goes on, right? So Banner of Kinship, in fact, like artifacts in general in green, not typically where you want to be playing a lot of artifacts because green just does it better. Artifacts will want to fill in for the colors that don't do this as well. So we're talking blue, not necessarily white. White also does it well, right? But like this could also be really good in a white deck. But I'd say the best colors to run this sort of card in will be blue, red, and black. Those are going to be the three where you get the most bang for your buck with a card like Banner of Kinship because those colors can't pump the board or like just finish via a strong alpha strike as well as white and green can. So, you know, this is a really good card. I think you need to test it out. I would say just estimating off the top of my head, you probably want to be running at least 20 of the same creature type before you consider running something like this. But it depends because, like in my Glarb deck, for example, getting Guild of the Dead out is such an important piece of what that deck's trying to do. I wouldn't run this in that deck, but I could. There are times when I have like 20 zombies out, and if I drop this and have a bunch of 22 zombies, that could be game over. But that's also a green deck where I could just run Crater Hoof Behemoth. So um yeah, just think about whether this makes sense for your deck, and you might just need to test it out and feel it out, but it's a really strong card, and I think it deserves a home in a lot of tribal decks. All right, I threw this one on. Spoiler alert, this is not going to win, but I do really like this card, and I don't think it's getting enough credit. I think it's a cool card, and it does this in colors that aren't necessarily super great at this. White can be good, especially now that they have some new stuff like Moonshaker Cavalry, but this is a fun one. It's called Knowledge is Power, and it's 5 mana, three, a white, and a blue for an enchantment that says creatures you control get plus X, where X is the number of cards you've drawn this turn. So on your turn, assuming you've drawn one card for your turn, at minimum your stuff's getting +1/+1. But if you got a way to burst card draw, which is quite easy to do in white and blue, two of the strongest card draw colors, hey, it's 2024. White is damn good at drawing cards all of a sudden. Go figure. This can be just a game ender, like out of nowhere, right? In a blue deck with splash white. So, fun card, try it out. It's certainly not gonna fit in every single deck, but there are a lot of cool and fun decks that can find a home for this card, and I think it's a good one that people should play a little bit more. All right, Patchwork Banner. So 3 mana for a mana rock. Uh, Choose a creature type when it enters, and creatures of that type get +1/+1. Tap to add 1 mana of any color. So this is probably the casual player card of the year. I'm just calling it right now. It's getting an honorary Surfie I just made up as like casual player card of the year, Patchwork Banner. And it deserves it. This is a neat card. This is a 3 mana rock that I'm happy to run in a lot of decks. And that's no small feat. I think like 3 mana rocks are totally not in vogue anymore, right? Like when I see people running Chromatic Lantern, or God help them, like people running Commander Sphere still. And if you're one of those people, my apologies. Um, you'll get good eventually. Don't worry about it. Just kidding. Kind of. Those cards are awful. Don't play them. Chromatic Lantern, maybe some edge cases, but like if you have Commander Sphere in a deck still and you want that deck to be above a power level 5, like get it out of there. Like there are tons of good 2 mana rocks, but Patchwork Banner, this effect is worth it. Like it can be worth it. You need to, it's the same thing I mentioned about Banner of Kinship. You need at least a decent number of creatures of the same type, but I think it's worth paying an extra mana for this like ancillary +1/+1 that really adds up over the course of the game. And this is such an innocuous card that no one's going to spend a spot removal on it. So effects like this can be deceptively powerful, and I really like Patchwork Banner. Last but not least, we've got War Leader's Call. This gem is from Murders at Karlov Manor, and Aurelia is pissed. So one a red and a white, your creatures get +1/+1. So just a straight up Anthem effect, +1 for all of your creatures. And whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, this enchantment deals 1 damage to each opponent. So it's an impact tremors plus a, what is the generic +1/+1 to your board called? All I can think of is Crusade for white and Batman for black. Anyway, Glorious Anthem, I think that's what it's called. So it's like Glorious Anthem plus Impact Tremors, they smushed them together, and boom, you get Ward Leader's Call for no extra mana. So really, you're getting like a 2 mana Impact Tremors effect tacked on for free. So you're getting 2 cards for the price of one for the same mana cost. So this card's crazy good. Just simple, powerful, brutally powerful. Like the number of these impact tremors kind of effects that they're printing is starting to get a little redonkulous. It's like we already saw Furfuros, aka Agate Instigator, and it was the winner of the group slug burn category, the highly contested, I should remind you, group slug burn category, of which there are tons of pinger effects like this. So like this incidental damage that just exists in Commander now is starting to get so high. It's like you can't, it almost feels like, those games where you're just like standing in poison or like the radiation zone, and it's just like you're taking constant damage. Commander's like just kind of starting to feel like that. You're just like, ow, 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 ow. And then all of a sudden everyone's below 20 life. And you're like, what happened? How does everyone get so low so fast? So, like, incidental life gain stuff, we're going to talk about life gain in a couple categories, is becoming more and more important, I think, just to offset all of this, like, random incidental burn that, like, goes around all the time. So, War Leader's Call is one of the best ways to do this. And in a deck that wants to be making a lot of tokens, which many Boros decks are, you're going to want this card. This goes at, if your deck's just straight Boros, you almost certainly want this card unless it's a very specific deck like Feather the Redeemed or something where you're not necessarily making a lot of tokens. That's like a weird Voltron style deck, but like most of the time, if you're playing Boros colors, this is just an auto include. It's really that good. So that is it for the Anthem and Pump category. And the Surfie for Best Anthem and Pump card of 2024 goes to Banner of Kinship. New guy getting the award, snuck in at the last minute to win it. Banner of Kinship is just such a powerful card. You're really getting your mana's worth with a card like this. And for 5 generic mana, to be able to like slot into a mono red deck, like a goblins deck, like throw this in your Krenko deck, any Krenko, like any mono red deck really like is probably gonna want this card. Any mono blue deck that is making creatures like what is that? Mina, the one that makes illusions, like this the thing that makes this card so powerful is that it's an effect that we needed more redundancy on for colors that don't normally get effects like this. Like, it's hard to think off the top of my head of where this is best because it's good in so many places. And you'll just find as you build more and more decks that you'll be reaching for this card more often than you think. I think because like when you need it, you'll really need it. Like I said earlier, like in a green deck, it's not important at all because artifact effects artifacts are the easiest non-creature permanent to remove by far. So having such a powerful effect on an artifact is not where you want it because it is the least safe there. But in colors like blue, red, and black that just don't get a ton of effects like this is very, very important and very good. So deserving of the award. All right, up next is everyone's favorite, the +1/+1 counters category. This is really one that they're leaning hard on lately. +1 counter decks feel like the new normal. It's like, you know, every deck it has some sort of plus one counter synergy nowadays, it feels like. So this is a category that, I narrowed it down to just 6 cards. There were many more than this, many more. I chose what I thought were the 6 best, and these are all so good that it's nearly impossible to pick a winner. But I will do so. But man, these cards are all so powerful. It's unreal. Plus one counter decks have never been more powerful ever. And it seems like every set they're just coming out with something more and more busted for them. So let's start off with Mr. Busted himself, Firstly Bill Spine Sower. This varmint is a 2/2 for 2 mana. Yeah, he's only 2 mana. Why? Because he's a cactus. Why not? Get spiked, fool. Bristly Bill, Spine Sower. 2 mana 2/2. When on landfall, put a +1 counter on any creature. Doesn't have to be any other creature, because that would be worse. And they don't make things worse anymore. They only make things better. And what's the other ability? Probably not that relevant, right? 5 mana. Double the number of +1 counters on each creature you control. Oh my god. Well, you can only do it once a turn, right? Where's that line? Did it get cut off? Or it says only activate this once a turn? Didn't. That's interesting. So, if you double the number of counters and then activate it again, doesn't the doubling get even bigger that time? And then, like, what if you had parallel lives in play, or branching evolution or hardened scales? Yeah, it does work that way. So if your pathetic, puny opponents are unlucky enough to allow you to get Bristly Bill out and have 10 mana available or a roaming throne in play, God help them, it's just like lights out for them. If you can activate that second ability twice and they can't do anything, it's just super GG. This card is crazy. I built it and I played it a handful of times, and it was like 3v1, everyone like throwing everything at me to keep him off the board, to deal with whatever I was playing. And if that wasn't happening, the game was just over. Like so fast. And for 2 mana, like even if they kill him twice, he's still like 6 mana. It's like, okay, still like totally fine. This card's crazy. Like as a commander, crazy. In the 99 in a +1 counter deck, crazy. Card is just like, why did they make it so good? Wizards, why you do this? This card, like, I don't even know. I can't even. All right. Well, yeah, that's it. Bristly Bill is pretty good. Pretty good. Speaking of pretty good, Communal Brewing from Bloomer Commander, 2 and a green, enchantment. When it enters, any number of target opponents each draw a card. So you decide. They don't get the option. You either let them draw or not. And then you're going to put an ingredient counter on this, then put an ingredient counter on it for each card drawn this way. So the way they worded this was awful, to say the least, and everyone will be confused every time. But basically, how it works is it gets 1 counter automatically, and then it gets an extra counter for everyone you had draw a card. So if all of your opponents are still there and you had 4 people, then and you let everyone draw one, then it comes in with 4 counters because it gets one automatically. So even if you didn't want anyone to draw, it would come in with 1 counter automatically. And then whenever you cast a creature spell, so it's not on any creature entering, it's only on cast, but when you do, creatures enter with that many extra +1 counters on them. So if you have Everyone Draw, which is what you're going to be doing most of the time, then all of a sudden you play your Llanowar Elf, and boom, it's a 5/5. That's assuming you have no other amplification effects like Hardened Scales, Ozolith, you know, Branching Evolution, Gamekeeper's Talent. Oh my god, I was playing a game in real life with my real life pod like 3 weeks ago, and my friend had Communal Brewing out. Well, he had Innkeeper's Talent on level 3. He played the Communal Brewing and had everyone draw. So it enters with 4 counters, right? No, don't forget, he had Innkeeper's Talent. So it entered with 8 counters. And then he played a single creature, like 1/1 creature, and it entered with not just 8 counters, 16 counters. Yes, it does work that way. And yes, it was absolutely crazy and glorious. This card's just so good. Like it's from Miss Bumbleflower Commander deck, and that's actually like the worst deck for it in my opinion, because that's just I mean the way I built it at least is just like a Voltron deck. So I ended up cutting it from that deck, but I do play it like in my 6 deck. I played in any deck that has at least like a critical mass of creatures like in the deck, like 25 plus. This card's just good enough. And like it does suck if they destroy it, because then you had everyone draw a card and then it got destroyed. But like, you know, there's so many threats in commander games. People have to make hard choices, and there's not always enough enchantment or removal to go around to deal with every single thing that's out. So try this card. It's just really good. I bought like almost 200 copies of it because I'm convinced that it's worth more than this amount. So we'll see if I end up being right or if history proves me otherwise. But I think this card gets there. It's just every time I've played it, it's either been removed instantly or the game, it's taken over the game for me. It turns every single creature you cast into a threat. And like for 3 mana, that's just it's hard to beat that sort of value. Keeper's Talent. So we had a lot of really cool class cards with Bloomburrow. Great set. Like definitely the set of the year in my opinion. Such a fun set, such a flavorful set. Fan favorite, cute animals, great effects, class cards. Like what more could you ask? Like such a win, right? Bloomburrow was like, yeah, I couldn't be happier with it. And Innkeeper's Talent, I think, definitely the best of the class cards, and there are a lot of really good ones. So that's saying something. What does it do? For 2 mana, you get the level 1 effect, right? Which is at the beginning of combat on your turn, put a +1 counter on a creature you control. So pretty tame stuff for that level 1 effect. However, I do really like it because one thing about +1 counter decks is like, there are a lot of counter amplification cards, but like sometimes you're missing the actual ways to put counters on something. And just having this way to put, even if it's only a single counter on, like that can be all it takes to get things started in terms of like sometimes it's just like you need to start putting counter, even like 1 or 2 counters here or there. And then the level 2 obviously combos very well with it. And for only a single mana, like this is a great effect. Permanents you control with counters on them have ward 1. So you get to give something a counter right away, assuming you play this in your first main phase. And then having Ward 1, as I've mentioned a few times now, this is just a psychological barrier that some people can't get past. Like, it's so easy to pay Ward 1, right? But, like, for some people, first of all, there's some unreasonable people who just won't pay any tax for any reason. So they won't even bother targeting your stuff, even if they can do it, right? Have you played with those people? They're like, oh, I don't pay taxes, just on principle. I'm like, my God, I hate people who say that. Like, you're playing a game. Like you have, a game is about making hard choices and like trying to do what you want to do while balancing like the difficult things that your opponents are throwing at you. So for you to just make this blanket statement that you're not going to do whatever, is so unreasonable in my opinion. But that's just how some people are, and like I can't change that as much as I try or whine about it. But we can take advantage of that by playing cards that give stuff word one, because like maybe they have that one mana sitting there, but they're just not going to pay it because they're principled and blah 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 blah. Anyway, this word one effect more powerful than it appears, and I think it's a really nice addition to this card. And then that level three is 4 mana, so it does cost quite a lot to get there. It's the original 2 plus 1 plus 4 is 7 in total, but you can pay it in installments, which is very meaningful. And it's like a doubling season type effect. Doesn't double the tokens, it's just double the counters, but it's on any permanent or player, right? So it doubles energy, it doubles poison if you're poisoning, if you're into that, like playing infect or something. It does, increase those counters. Don't do that because it's not cool. But I mean, I guess if that's your jam, go for it. It also doubles Planeswalker's loyalty. So you play a Planeswalker, enters double loyalty, which pretty scary. Pretty scary stuff. So Innkeeper's Talent, it's better than Doubling Season, in my opinion. Assuming you don't care about the token generation part of Doubling Season, like this is the effect you want in a +1 counter deck. The fact that you can pay it in pieces, the fact that it gives ward one, it gives that like nice little single counter every turn. All these things together make this just a slam dunk. This card's really, really good. All right, let's talk about Quilled Great Worm. I have not had a chance to play this yet, but it does seem exceedingly powerful. 6 mana. It's a 7/7 trample, so great rate already. 7/7 trample and for 6 mana. Excellent. It's not like the best ever, but very, very potent. And it says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, not just to a player, it just has to deal combat damage to anything. Planeswalker, creature, player, anything. Put that many +1 counters on it. So if you attack with Quilled Great Worm, it is a creature dealing combat damage. Let's say it's 7. It's going to get 7 counters. So quite nuts. It doesn't just affect itself, though. It affects all creatures you have. So, um, yeah, I mean, you heard what the card does. It's pretty crazy. It doesn't like pump everything immediately unless your stuff has double strike, in which case, OMG, like opponents are in for it because your creature will hit once, get that many +1 counters, and then hit again and get even more. And if you have an Innkeeper's Talent out and each of those is doubled, it's like, okay, my creature is at 300 now. Your turn. And then, hey, they threw in another effect. What do you know? What does that say? You can cast this from your graveyard by removing 6 counters from among creatures you control in addition to paying out their costs. Wow. So, well, how are you going to get 6 counters on your creature? Oh, yeah. Whenever a creature you control deals combat damage during your turn, put that many +1 counters on it. What do you know? Yeah, this is just a super pushed and powerful +1 counter card. Hey, do I sound like a broken record? If you just jam all 6 of these cards into a deck, you kind of just win the game. Try building a +1 counter deck. It's like impossible. You have to cut so many. The cards you end up cutting are just like so good. You're like, I have to cut this. Like it, building Commander deck's never been harder. There's just way too many good cards. Come on, Wizards, give us some crap. I dare you. Railway Brawler. 5 mana, 5/5 with reach and trample. Again, great rate. Green creatures are just so, so good now. Um, and then whenever another creature enters under your control, this doesn't have to be cast like Communal Ruins, just anytime a creature enters, you put X+1 counters on it, where X is that creature's power. So if you play a Galta Primal Hunger, it comes in with 12 +1 counters. Seems pretty good. And then it's got plot for 3 and a green. Plot, in case you don't remember, is kind of like foretell, except that you're paying for the card in full at the time you plot it. So let's say it's turn 4. I don't have the mana to cast this yet, but I do have 4, so I can pay for it, plot it. Opponents see what it is. It just goes into the like plot zone or whatever you call it. And then on a later turn, which will have to be your turn unless you have a way to cache things at flash speed, you can play it without paying its mana cost, but it has to be as sorcery. So actually, what I said about flash speed is not true because it says cast it as a sorcery on a later turn without paying its mana cost. So you do have to play this on your turn. So you can plot it on turn 4, but then on turn 5 you can play it for free. So this is great if you have ways to combo with it, like if other stuff you want to cast alongside it, like a double major is a good example. You can plot this on turn 4, then play double major and cast Railway Brawler. And getting a copy of this is really good too because you'll get the first one, right? It comes in as a 5/5. It doesn't count itself because it says whenever another creature enters, but the copy is another creature. So now the copy will enter with 5+1/+1 counters and end up being a 10/10. And then any creature you play is going to get 5 counters from the original and 10 from the copy. So your creatures will enter with 15+1 counters. If we back up to the same scenario, and imagine that we have an Innkeeper's Talent in play on level 3, then what happens? Well, play the first one. Well, we plot it on turn 4, right? Or whatever. We plot it the prior turn. Then we go to our turn where we can cast it. You don't have to plot it, whatever. Plotting it is not necessary for this example, but it's going to enter with just as a 5/5 still, right? Unless you had something else that's giving counters. But then the copy will come in and it would enter with 5 counters, but instead it's going to enter with 10 counters. So it'll be at 15/15. And then you've got 20 power of Railway Brawlers in play. So if you play a Llanowar Elves, that Llanowar Elves will enter with 40+1 counters and be a 41/41. So yeah. And then I don't know if you knew this, but in Commander, you start at 40 life. So your 41/41 Llanowar Elf could, in theory, attack a player at their starting life total and kill them dead. So, yeah, you should do that because that's how you win the game. I don't know if you knew this, but you win the game by reducing your opponent to 0 or less life, assuming they don't have some effect that prevents them from dying if they're at 0 or less life. Scythe Cat Cub. Look at that price tag. For a time, this was a $50 card, and like this is actually a reasonable price, I think. I know I keep telling you to buy cards, but like I would buy this card right now. I mean, it might still come down a little bit more, but like look how good is this? 2 mana for a 2/2 trample. Yeah, why do they have to give it trample? Because that is going to be highly relevant because whenever you play a land, +1 counter on a creature you control. Hey, where have we seen that effect before? Oh, Bristly Bill, right, right. Okay. So it's just like a Bristly Bill, but it's not legendary and it has trample. And if it's the second time this ability has resolved this turn, also double the number of counters on that creature instead. What? Okay. Bristly Bill was like really good, too good, right? This card was pushed. It was a mistake almost for Commander, casual Commander, right? Oh, okay. Let's make it non-legendary, give it trample, and give it a second landfall where it doubles the number of counters. Surely this is a joke, right? Also, don't call on me Shirley. How do you even pick a winner in these cards? Like, they're so good. No, really, how? Because I have to do it right now, I think. I think that's what I'm doing here, right? Where am I? Um, yeah. So these cards are so good. I don't even know what else to say. Um, Fetch lands are better than ever, right? Because every fetch land is two landfall triggers. And hey, did you know that if it's the second time this ability has resolved this turn, you double the number of +1 counters instead? So it turns out playing a Wooded Foothills over a forest in a mono green deck is pretty good when you've got a Scythe Cub. And if you don't have copies of the fetch lands, forget all the other things I told you to buy and buy those first. They're the most important cards in Magic ever, and that will never change. So, Scythe Cat Cub, Bristly Bill, which one's better? I don't even know. Like, they're both good for different reasons, right? This doubles just on two landfalls, right? You don't have to do anything else. But Bristly Bill, that second ability can just win you the game, like if you have one or two activations of it. So they're both absolutely brokenly good. So just you want both. If you had to like twist my arm and tell me like buy one of these over the other, like I would just buy whichever one is cheaper because they're both insanely good. But there can be only one winner for the Surfies. So the 2024 winner for best +1 counter card of the year goes to Psych. I did decide it's Bristly Bill. Bristly Bill, he it's that it's that second ability. I mean, like that this card just wins you the game by itself. I mean, you need some land. I don't know if you knew this, but many Magic the Gathering players ask, "Do I need land in my deck?" And turns out you do. And turns out Bristly Bill likes it if you have land in your deck. So synergy. This card's crazy. It's there's little else to say about that. Like, if you see a Bristly Bill across from you, you better grab that freaking weed whacker and get cracking because otherwise it's lights out for like the table if this sticks around for more than a turn or two. But do not skip over any of these other cards here. Everything here is so strong. Building a +1 counter deck has never, ever, ever been more viable. These cards are so good. I'd say like this is the golden age of +1 counter decks, 100%.